We are affiliated with the larger Catholic Relief Services, which is the official humanitarian agency of the Catholic community in the United States. CRS works in 114 countries, partnering with people, organizations, and governments around the world to uphold the human dignity of every person and to end poverty, disease, hunger, and injustice. CRS serves on the basis of need, not creed. So while we are based in Catholic values, we serve more than just Catholic people. We serve those in need. On campus, our CRS chapter aims to bring global issues to the attention of those at St. John's. We try to connect students with opportunities for advocacy and networking, as well as help people seek avenues for change within their spheres of influence. That being said, recent events in Afghanistan left our CRS ambassadors and fellow organizers feeling like we needed to do something to help. Direct service obviously isn't possible under the current conditions, and donations are great, but we recognize that some of us don't necessarily have the privilege to donate, but we can do other things like educating ourselves, educating others. We can listen to people's lived experiences like we will today. We can also advocate to our representatives in the United States to ask for more money towards humanitarian aid in the US fiscal budget. Currently, only 1% of our fiscal budget goes to international affairs, and of that, only 0.5% goes to international poverty reducing and humanitarian assistance programs. So with that, I want to thank everyone again for taking this time out of their busy schedules to come today, and I'll turn it over to our St. John's Pakistani Students Association.
Hi, everyone. Thank you guys for coming out, and I'm really honored to be a part of this and represent PSA. So I'm Khadija. I am the VP as the Pakistani Students Association. As a Pakistani organization, and considering the fact that Pakistan is Afghanistan's neighbor, we share culture and we share a lot of values. So we thought it was important that we get involved and in this panel and keep the conversation about Afghanistan going. Like, we don't want it to be a one-time trend. We want this to be something that can be super educational for everyone. Pakistan has played a huge role in the current crisis, and as Pakistanis, we do not condone any actions of the Pakistani government that have led to the current state in Afghanistan. And we just want to make it clear that we stand in solidarity with our neighbors, and we want to contribute to amplifying their voices as much as possible. So we're just going to hand it over to, I'm also in NARI, but we're going to hand it over to our liaison who's going to introduce NARI. So.
Hi guys, thank you guys so much for coming today. My name is Janna and I'll be representing NARI as a liaison. NARI is an organization for South Asian women, and our mission is to create an environment of comfort and support where they can voice their opinions without the case of being judged. We also open conversations about topics that we've been restricted to talk about, whether like in our homes or just like because of society, and create a safe space for women on campus. We also address issues that impact women worldwide. And one of our reasons that we're all here today is to talk about Afghanistan and how the country's issues directly impact women, such as women not being able to dress and express themselves freely, and also the restrictions on education due to the Taliban. And I'll just pass on to the next speaker, who are Feminists Unite.
Hi, I'm Adila. I am current treasurer of Feminists Unite. We will have more e-board members joining us throughout the Congress thing right now. But so we're an intersectional feminist club on campus advocating for equal rights and representation for all communities. And we believe this panel is so important because people's rights are being infringed upon, especially women, and it just needs to be discussed so students are informed and educated. Thank you. I think the next speaker will be from MSA, if I'm not mistaken.
Hi, my name is Mazia, and I'm on the executive board of the Muslim Student Association, also known as MSA. And basically, the Muslim Student Association, in a nutshell, is an Islamic organization where Muslims can gather and practice their faith freely. And it's essentially just to provide a secure space for Muslims on campus where they feel safe discussing religion and current events. we thought it was important to collab with CRS to talk about Afghanistan, as Afghanistan's major religion is Islam, and we want to support our brothers and sisters and spread the issues that are going on in Afghanistan. So here we are. I
Okay.
think next,
Yeah,
oh,
I'm
sorry.
back. So I'm also representing UNICEF. I'm currently president. So UNICEF's a student-led chapter advocating and fundraising for the health, safety, and education of children. And this panel is especially relevant to us because it's obviously a human right issue, and it's affecting children who have to grow up in an environment where their basic human rights are being taken away. And yeah, we're just here to spread awareness and educate. So yeah, I will also be introducing our moderator, Kirin. So Kirin Taylor is an adjunct professor at SJU and self-employed educator and writer. She has previously worked in research and advocacy through civil society and the United Nations, and brings this experience to consultancy and peace education. She holds a Master's of Art in Government and Politics and an advanced certificate in International Law and Diplomacy. Her current projects include writing a political resource called Political Thoughts from an Underdeveloped Mind, leading peace workshops and trainings through the nonprofit Little Friends for Peace, and participating in the administration of Peace International political party. So Karen, thank you for speaking with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much to you and to all the organizers for making this happen today. I think it's really awesome to see all the collaboration between, I think that was 6 different organizations, and it's just really impressive to see people coming together around this issue. So thank you. It's great to see some of my former students here as well. This topic is of great importance, not solely because it's prominent in the news, relevant internationally and concerning people in communities that our attendees here intersect with, but also because it constitutes a sustained crisis with human rights and with the global community. So it's something we need to be aware of. For today's panels and for my own comments, I think it's important to see the different lenses that we're applying. So it's not just talking about it, but also including social justice, gender, a historical perspective, and comparative politics. So with many other pertinent crises happening now around the world, there's distraction from this topic, and it's easy to get distracted. But it's also, in the other sense, it's dangerous to be too distracted from something that's so important to so many millions of people around the world. And I think that most university students, such as the ones here today, are concerned with these topics, democracy, women's rights, freedoms, and the freedoms including speech and assembly, which thankfully we have in order to speak today. So like the title is, let's talk about Afghanistan, what's happening there, and the implications. Today we have a very skilled panel present, and we thank them prematurely for their time and sharing expertise. And I will note that in trying to organize this panel, we've had several people who have made their utmost efforts to try to highlight the voices of people directly involved in the crisis or with the ramifications of the crisis, and that has been difficult. For example, because our first speaker, who was based in Afghanistan, is at risk from the Taliban because of his activism, he's actually been unable to join us live today, and he does not want his speech tracked. So unfortunately, well, fortunately and unfortunately, I've been able to transcribe some of his comments today, and we'll still be able to share those with you. And I just want to say also, in this whole amount of communication with Hizbullah, he's been so wonderful in trying to get this information out there, trying to promote the causes he's passionate about while being under a serious and real threat that really came up the most when we saw that he had to cancel. So I'm still going to introduce him and to read his statements. So Hizbullah Baryal is an Afghan man currently in the process of seeking asylum from Afghanistan. As a youth activist, Hizbullah has been involved in different youth programs in Afghanistan as well as outside of his country. Currently, he is completing his Master of Business Administration from Kardan University located in Kabul. Just to note that he has had to relocate due to the crisis, so he's still hoping to finish school. He is also a social assignment in the capacity of director with Youth for Change and Development Organization, and he is an active member of the Global Afghan Forum, Global Shapers Community, and Adalet Party. In addition, he has done a one-year leadership course with Young Leaders Forum, a worldwide initiative by the German FES organization. He recently finished a one-year youth capacity building program with the National Democratic Institute. Apart from this, he works as a director for Worldview Mission in Afghanistan, representative of Youth for Human Rights International in Afghanistan, as well as Youth Action Hub Coordinator for Afghanistan. In 2014, he became a voice learner and member of the World Innovation Summit for Education in Qatar and in Spain. So undoubtedly, he has a lot to say and a lot of experience in activism and education. So I'm excited to share these comments from him. If we can go to the next slide. Thank you. I will tell my story beginning a Sunday morning, the 15th of August. At that time, almost 30 Afghan provinces were fallen to the Taliban. The government were still having hope to the people that everything would be all right. So we reached to my office at 11 a.m. and suddenly there was a security alarm and we were instructed by the security to leave the office space and go back home. So I went from the office to the road. I took a taxi to go back home in the midst of everyone running to reach their homes. Many people were crying, including myself. That cry was not because we were scared, but that was for the country, because we had lost all the achievements from the last 20 years. The hopes, the visions that we had for the country and for the future of the country. We were sad and disappointed for that time. On my way back home, I saw people were looting the tanks and military cars near the office. I don't know what they were doing, but they were lootings in Kabul and in other provinces as well. So I reached home. Everyone was very depressed and disappointed. Everyone was saying we lost the country and the country is gone. That was a hard point and a difficult moment. That was the first time in my life I saw a situation so difficult. You know, Afghanistan is suffering for the last 40 years. The people are suffering. In this time, around 1.5 million people died, innocent people. The women became widowed, the schools distraught, the roads destroyed. Now people have started to be evacuated, or attempted to. Lots of educated people from the previous government cabinets. Lots of young people who are assets of this country, fearing for their lives, they are being evacuated as well. Thousands of people are going to Kabul International Airport. You may have seen in the news that many of those people died and fell down from the plane because they wanted to be evacuated. Those were all difficult and hard times for us because we were not expecting that the Taliban would take control of Afghanistan in the short amount of time. Because the provinces started falling, and then within weeks, they took the presidential palace, almost 2 weeks. Even the Taliban were surprised. They've expressed, we were aiming to take control of Afghanistan in 3 or 4 months, but we didn't know how we took control within just a matter of weeks. People inside and outside of Afghanistan are suffering a lot. People with family, brothers and sisters in the country are worried and scared. It has also impacted the Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations a lot. The Sustainable Development Goals are talking about poverty, employment and economic growth, development, no hunger. In almost 1.5 months passing, the Taliban are ruling the government, meaning most of the government and organizations are not fully operational. The women are not allowed to go back to their jobs. The girls are not allowed to go to the secondary school, high school, and into the university. They are not allowed, only the boys are allowed. If we are talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, the government wanted to adopt and achieve these by 2030, but we have fallen. I don't think we'll be in the position to implement and achieve these by 2030. On the other side, the poverty, no one has jobs. The people are suffering because the prices of every item has gone up, and the people cannot afford that. Things have closed, nothing is moving, and that is why the unemployment rate is increasing day by day in the country. People are selling their house equipment to just find some money and buy food for a night or two. Regarding economic growth, there is no import and export between Afghanistan and other countries. The international airport was damaged and there are no flights. Each day we are losing money due to the airspace, and the same thing goes for the barters and the air corridors. The projects from the United Nations and embassy, everything is gone and zero. So that's his input. And I'd also like to read something else that he said to me directly to share. This is his recommendation, both to the Taliban and to the international community. Now that they've taken control of the country, he said, now let's the international community make a decision with their allies in the USA to legitimize them. Once we do that, everything will start. These big projects will then resume and lots of people will go back to work and the government will be able to go back to work and reassign ministries. Of course, this may result in more women and girls receiving their rights and being able to attend school. In this case, I think they should not be against human rights, the basic education of girls in Afghanistan, and the freedom of speech. If the Taliban really want to stay longer in Afghanistan, to rule the country for longer, they need to give all these opportunities for people to make a great Afghanistan. So that's the end of his comments. I hope I didn't read that too fast, but obviously those are a lot of significant suggestions and points, and especially having that personal story of what happened as he witnessed the country government changing. It's really important to just kind of put yourself in those shoes to get a sense of what happened. I think two of the points that he said are pretty significant in terms of what other people may be reading in the news. He does note the rapidness by which the Taliban took control. And I think this is prominent in many political analyses and news reports. And it's for those who don't have too much of a sense of the history behind what happened, the Taliban previously had control from 1996 to 2001, at which point the United States took over a lot of the country and, well, by offering support, and they had the Afghanistan government reinstated. So at this point, the Taliban have now taken control primarily of the government again, and the United States have withdrawn their troops. So that's what people mostly know from the news. But what we see is that the Taliban are trying to frame this as a peaceful transition. So we have the executive director of LEARN, which is an organization in Afghanistan, and her name is Pashtana Durrani. And she says that what's being framed as a peaceful transition by the Taliban has actually had an exceptional amount of bloodshed for the 21st century. And so also we see at the end, his suggestion was for the Taliban to be legitimized. So I want to get into the suggestions that Hizbullah gave towards the end, which I think may appear confusing for people who perhaps don't know why we would legitimize the Taliban as a government. So I want to clarify that there are other analysts and activists in agreement with his assertion, such as Donald R. Rothwell, who works with the Interpreter, who states formal recognition as a legitimate government may be a bargaining chip to press the Taliban to respect human rights. So many people who are at a loss for how human rights will be protected with this new regime that has a history in that previous period of rule from 1996 to 2001 of being far beyond problematic towards women, towards minorities, and towards vulnerable groups, and wanting those people to be protected. They're hoping that perhaps recognition of the Taliban as a government may achieve that. And that's just one of many perspectives on what should be done going forward. So with our limited time today, it will be hard to cover fully all these topics, and there's much more to unpack there in the areas of international relations and law. But I do want to transition to the topic of gender a little bit, because our next panelist will be shedding light on that topic. And just referring back to what Hizbullah said, he said he's already witnessed women not being able to return to their jobs, which is one premature sign that this new regime will be detrimental to women's rights as they're viewed in international law. So I want to turn over to Zahra, if we can go to the next slide. I would love to hear how your work and focus intersects with the crisis, and especially with the gender dimension. So we have today with us Zahra Wakilzada, who is a young Afghan activist, public speaker, and published author who sought refuge in the United States in 2015. She began her activism work through writing at a very young age. This passion flourished upon seeking refuge in Pakistan at the age of 12, where she began to further educate herself on the world's injustices. Among many of her public speaking events, she has previously spoken during the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women on Women's and Youth Rights. She's currently a third-year student at the Georgetown University, located in Washington, D.C., studying international politics and women and gender studies. Zahra hopes to combine her passion for writing and activism to make the world a safer place for everyone and leave a long-lasting impact, which I know she has already done. So we're very excited to hear from you, Zahra. You have the floor.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for the introduction. I would like to thank everybody for taking time out of their afternoon to be here, and thanks to organizations that put this together. My name is Zahra Wakilzada. I'm an Afghan refugee, poet, and activist. I spent 13 years of my life in Afghanistan and grew up in a household where women's education and empowerment was a priority. Upon the start of the Taliban regime, their first regime in 1996, my mom became the center of activism in my household. Among many people who faced an uncertain future, the women of Afghanistan lost their rights and they were facing the dark ages and they were living through the dark ages of Afghanistan. At that time, my mom was 19 years old and became the breadwinner of her family members. Her father was a math teacher and was teaching all girls schools, and the Taliban closed all of the schools for women's education. My mother was among very few numbers of nurses and doctors who were allowed to work during the Taliban regime, given the fact that the Taliban wouldn't allow women to seek health resources from any man. During that time, many women who became activists and fought for education and their rights stood outside unapologetically without a man, and they were beaten many times. The story of my mom and many other women throughout history, and currently when we are talking about Afghanistan, has been erased. We imagine Afghanistan as a hopeless place and helpless place, and we forget that the people on the ground are fighting for their rights and are standing for themselves and are being resistance to the brutal regime that's taking over Afghanistan right now. Decades after the first regime, as women of Afghanistan fought to establish a better country for our new generation, the most powerful around the world sat down and watched all the hard work of Afghan women and women in diaspora turn into ashes. Now, 20 years later, at the age of 20, the same age when my mom went through the first regime of the Taliban, I put my head on the pillow and I know that I have a safe place, but the nightmare that she lived through doesn't let me sleep. I immigrated to the United States in 2015, but I first became a refugee in 2013 to Pakistan when the Taliban's last attack, direct attack on my mom took place. Afghanistan was no longer a safe space for my 13-year-old self or my younger siblings, so we had to seek refuge somewhere nearby. And through UNHCR, I was able to seek refuge to the United States in 2015. Since then, my work has heavily been focused on Afghanistan. My work through activism through art, and in addition to that, working with refugees and different organizations on the ground and diaspora. Currently, my work is mainly focused through poetry and also with organizations who are welcoming refugees in different places in the United States, but also providing relief fund to individuals on the ground. It is very important to acknowledge that Afghanistan is not only suffering right now, but half of its population is being erased. Women are no longer allowed to attend secondary education. Their rights to be employed is being discussed. Their clothing is being policed and their freedom is being restricted. Only a couple of days ago, I received the news that women are no longer allowed to have smartphones. Further, it's not only the issue of Afghan women at the moment, but also the lack of discussing intersectional identities that is not at the table. Many women who hold ethnic and religious identities, such as our Hazara women and our Shia women, are at great risk in Afghanistan. The population is constantly facing persecution. They were persecuted during the Taliban's first regime, and right now the same history is repeating itself. It is very important to talk about the fact that individuals on ground or off ground, whether it's Afghans in Afghanistan, Afghan diaspora, or individuals with different identities around the globe, are not responsible for fixing a systemic issue, an issue that a lot of leaders around the world fail to solve. We are here to demand those powerfuls and those who are able to make changes to amplify the voices of Afghans on the ground and to help them find a way and alternatives. The nations across the world must refrain from recognizing the Taliban, take the activists and the most vulnerable who are still waiting to be evacuated to a safer place, and work to find alternatives and ensuring that Afghan women are not being erased. It is pivotal for us to amplify the voices of Afghan women, stand in solidarity with them, and hear their stories. We are not here to repeat what the US has been doing on the ground for the past couple of decades and say and feed into our savior and superiority complex. We are here to listen to our Afghan women and to ensure that the work that we are doing is sustainable and the next generation will not experience the same thing as what we are experiencing right now and what the generation before me experienced. What we are witnessing in Afghanistan right now is not only a reflection of history, but also a future that's coming. If the international community do not take action right now, the world will witness a broken Afghanistan, which will take generations to fix.
Thank you so much, Zahra. I have a quick follow-up question, if you don't mind. Just curious as to what actions would you like to see from the international community, including governments and non-governmental people, such as the people here today?
Right. As I also mentioned a little bit before, I think it is very important for the governments to do not acknowledge and recognize the Taliban. It is very important that acknowledge that in today's society and what's going on right now, people have been trying to spread propaganda and talk about the fact that the Taliban have changed, but we are seeing the same thing that happened during the first regime repeat itself right now. The Taliban are demanding international recognition in order for them to have a government and then further violate basic human rights. Not only that, the center of our attention right now must be protecting basic human rights, but also evacuating the most vulnerable. So many of Afghans and activists are left in Afghanistan and are in hiding. So many of people right now do not have access to basic necessities, including food, water, and shelter. So it is very important for us to find ways to evacuate those individuals who are in hiding right now and their life is not safe. We have a panelist who is not here right now, who is in hiding right now and is looking to seek asylum. However, the process itself has been very complicated. I am working with different Afghans in Afghanistan to get them out, but just like it has happened over years, the world is making business out of Afghans' lives. The amount of the cost for visas, the cost to get them out, and so many other things have been a burden on Afghans in diaspora and Afghans in Afghanistan. So not only that, but also ensuring that we are working to welcome refugees here. The US is right now is welcoming a great number of refugees, despite the fact that so many are still in Afghanistan. It is very important for us to create a safer space for them. As a refugee myself, who came to United States end of 2015, I experienced a lot of difficulties trying to understand the society and how it works. So it is important for us to be there for people, whether it's providing transportation, providing translation, filling out their legal forms, or just providing them with housing or basic needs to get their life started here.
Thank you so much for your contributions today. And I hope you're able to stick around for the question and answer portion, because I'm sure people will have questions for you. But your passion, it shows through, and the work that you've done thus far is very clear. I think you brought up a lot of very, very significant points, including that though people are hoping to think the best of the situation with the Taliban and that it can be different this time, that there's a lot of evidence pointing towards this being a sustained crisis and something that really, really demands our concern and attention and resources as well. And again, I think that acknowledgement of Hizbullah's being in danger and how a lot of people who are activists and educators are at risk is something important to keep in mind, because those are the people who we are asking to educate us on the topic. So we have a debt of gratitude towards them. I wanted to point out a few supports for some things you said, including Amnesty International, which is a global organization that works for human rights, have pointed out the lack of presence of women at the Taliban's negotiations thus far, which is a little bit further evidence of the exclusion of women from the new regime as well. We also see that a lot of people, including experts, are very critical of the way that women are being treated. Heather Barr, who is a women's rights employer of Human Rights Watch, says that even the Taliban's best positions and actions on the ground do not reflect what is required of them from human rights law, including towards women. So we have a lot of cause for concern here, and we do see that, like you commented on, the need to welcome people who are refugees and destigmatize Islam and refugees are very important things as well. I'd like to transition to our next speaker, Ajifanta, who I think may be able to touch upon some of those topics more deeply. So if we can go to that slide, please. Okay, great. So thank you again, Zahra, for your comments. Ajifanta Marenah, we welcome you to the floor. Ajifanta was born in the Gambia and migrated to the United States when she was 12 years old. She completed her bachelor's in government and politics and master's in international relations at St. John's University. Currently, Ajifanta works as the advocacy coordinator at Muslim Community Network, where she conducts diversity education programs to deepen New Yorkers' understanding of Muslims and Islam, establish a strong hate crime reporting mechanism, and facilitate conversations on solutions, write communication pieces that inform policymakers on issues that impact Muslim New Yorkers, and participate in advocacy campaigns and initiatives at the local, state, and national levels. Prior to joining this organization, she worked as a graduate assistant with the government department at St. John's, as well as a research assistant with the Rose Lokism Foundation, where she assisted a coalition of organizations with consultations for victims of human rights violations. She has also been the president of the UNICEF chapter at St. John's and held other positions such as an intern at Human Rights Watch. As a multilingual Black woman and an immigrant and a Muslim in the United States, Ajifanta is constantly aware of the injustices that come with being a minority and strives to use her platform to dismantle the oppressive systems and biases that give way for these injustices. Thank you so much for being here, Ajifanta. We are very pleased to have your expertise, and I will note that Ajifanta tried to give up her position for someone who was able to speak more directly to what's happening in Afghanistan, but because of these coordinating problems and the risks there, she is someone who is going to give us a really needed perspective on some of these other topics that are coming into play with the crisis in Afghanistan. So thank you so much, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Kirin, for that introduction, and thank you everyone for having me here today. Before I start, I just want to say, commend Zahra and Hizbullah both for such bravery and being so strong and being voices of reason. I really appreciate your presence here today. So for me, mostly I'm going to present my research, which is a three-part research that kind of starts at the state of
state of women and children and how their welfare is impacted, starting from the state of conflict to during relocation and finally to the migration process, is going to be very brief because Zahra has done an amazing job, like touching on the different even systematic impacts on women during the all three stages. So I would just like start. Kirin, am I able to share my screen?
Just give us 1 second, sorry.
No problem.
You should be good to share your screen now.
Okay. Let's see. Okay. Okay, so just gonna skip those parts because we've mainly went through them. And so the theory that we'll be focusing on that really has significance to Afghanistan and what's happening there is the institutional theory, which is that government institutions control the migration policies, and if policies for legal migration are restricting, then new routes for illegal migration open up. But also like just looking at during the conflict and resettlement period, and now that the Taliban has taken over the Afghanistan government, I'll also touch a little bit on what that really means for people who have stayed behind and are still experiencing everything happening institutionally. And so during the conflict period, that's the main starting point. And so we'll examine how gender disparities at this stage impact the migration journey of women. And then the transition period is mostly where the displacement happens, how they go from being in a state of conflict to becoming refugees. How do existing gender disparities in these relocation and displacement camps impact the overall migration experience of women compared to men? And then the last part is how does the gender disparities present in both stages 1 and 2 make the migration experience of women more traumatic than their male counterparts? And so in reference to migration, here's referencing to forced migration, which is what Afghanistan refugees are going through right now. And so these are some of the countries I've looked at. It's a comparative analysis, but today we're focusing on Afghanistan. And this is reports from 2019 when 2.5 million refugees and IDPs are internally displaced people, 2 million. And in the past year, there has been an additional 550,000 internally displaced persons. And the numbers keep going up. As we know, we're still in the middle of a crisis right now. So in measuring the gender disparities, there's four main parts that we'll look at. So the private, which is in the household and who makes the decisions, male violence and the norms of who's responsible for what. And as Zahra has mentioned, with the Taliban control in Afghanistan, there's been a lot of questions in terms of both the private and the institutional level, the gender relations in the workplace. For instance, schools are being closed as well. Women, I know recently they have changed the Ministry of Ministry of Women Affairs to become the Ministry of Religious Studies and something of that nature. But so they've removed the Ministry of Women Affairs. So that's like on the institutional level, the changes that are happening right now. And the patriarchal relations in terms of like how women are viewed as is also in question right now. A lot of people are wondering what's going to happen, like with the Taliban's view that women are supposed to stay home and be wives instead of being students or working and having careers. And so like I mentioned, there's the 3 stages. So during the conflict, some of the experiences that women experience, and this research, although it's focusing more on how women are mostly impacted by this, it doesn't say that men don't also experience this. They do, but it's just showing that women are more likely to experience them, and the data have shown large numbers of women experience rape as a strategy of war, and the killing of men, a destruction of agriculture and infrastructure, and the separation of families. And that's also like in terms of destruction of infrastructure, like for instance, right now, a lot of the banks are closing down in Afghanistan. People are limited in terms of the number of money, cash they're supposed to withdraw. So it's also leading to an economic crisis. And then during the displacement period, on average, women spend about 17 years in displacement camps. Pregnancy as a result of sexual violence. There's a lack of medical facilities. Women become breadwinners because a lot of the men have already fled in the initial stages, and sexual and gender-based violence continues, and there's a high mortality rate also for women who are giving birth. For this part right now, what we're seeing in terms of what's happening in Afghanistan, like there's a lot of people displaced, like mostly in Pakistan and in Iraq. They're receiving a lot of refugees right now. The United States is also receiving refugees, but there's still like flights that are getting stopped midway before even getting to their destinations. And so there's a lot of people in these initial stages of displacement who are still in a lot of danger, like sleeping in the airports, not like becoming homeless during the process if they can't find anywhere to be registered, like UNICEF or any other humanitarian organizations, or like the UNHCR. In the migration period, that's like once they've been processed, and I'll show you guys like a graph of what's happening during the resettlement period. Once they've been processed and like resettling into the new society, like Zahra said, there's so many resources that they need. Like they've gone through so much trauma that they start experiencing like psychiatric distress. Illegal migration routes is mostly migration theory, which kind of explains that when the legal routes, like visas are limited, people start taking illegal migration routes because they become very like desperate and need to leave those endangered situations. Women are 70 to 80% more likely to get trafficked. And once they get to those places, when they use the illegal routes, there's more challenges because they have no legal status. So it becomes harder for them to find jobs, get educations, and other benefits and resources. Okay, we've went through most of this. I don't want to repeat it. And okay. Yeah. So like some of the other conditions in the displacement camps that I'll go over, like lack of hygiene and privacy and resources, like hospitals become limited. Women are mostly in charge of fetching for themselves, in charge of like the family and the household, getting wood. So they like, even while they're in displacement camps and there's like humanitarian organizations helping, women still have responsibilities to their families because most of the men, like I said, end up fleeing in the initial stages. And they experience other things like spread of infectious diseases. Mortality rates of women in displacement camps are 3.5 times higher than their male counterparts. And like I've said previously, they spend an average of 17 years, like, yeah, 5 to 17 years in displacement camps. Okay. And then like some of the factors that contribute to like the psychiatric distress and everything they go through once they get to the destination is like the lack of food, lack of shelter, sickness, lack of medical care, forced separation from family members. That's also one of the biggest challenges that happen during the displacement period, is that children are separated from their moms, and women are separated from their husbands, and so forth. And this is data from a survey of refugee women, which shows that a high risk of psychiatric distress the women experience include traumatization, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, and depression. 78.9% of women surveyed are from, this is from data from East Africa. And to just conclude, the existing cultural practices and norms that exist in some of these states with conflicts oppress women and outcast them, and they continue from the stages of conflict all the way to when they get to the resettlement destination. So it's not just during conflict or only during displacement, but during all three stages. And the impact these oppressions leave are carried by women as psychological traumas and distress as they try to create new lives in their destinations. I'm just gonna end it there. I don't wanna go overboard, but thank you all for your time.
Thank you so much, Ajifanta. Your presentation really brought it back to me that we're talking about people. Like very obviously we are talking about people. And so a lot of times with these global crises and seeing too much in the news, people start to, view these things as abstract rather than affecting individuals. So hearing these psychological and different practical events that people are going through in the attempts to migrate, that's very, very helpful, and I think saddening as well to see. So I think we only have a few more minutes left of this event. So I want to thank both of you panelists for being here, and Hizbullah for his contributions, despite the barriers that kept coming up. But I'd really like to get into a few questions for you guys before we have your expertise removed from us. So can we start with just how can we be more welcoming to refugees and start to destigmatize the Islamic religion, and also just the fact that people throughout history have always had to migrate, and that this is another situation that is extremely unfortunate, but that is causing a pattern that is actually normal throughout history. So I would love if you guys could respond to that or anything else that came up to you. Can we start with Aji, if that's okay with you?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Kirin. I think it starts like right when the whole it starts even before the conflicts. So making sure that we have states that respect the rule of law and human rights. I think right now, you've mentioned earlier, like there's some people who support the Taliban who are saying once it is recognized as a legitimate government, then they might be able to follow and respect these rights and rules. And like I'm on the other side of that. I'm more like, because they haven't done it, and since right now that when there's tension and conflict, they continue to disregard the rights of women, and not just women and children, but of the whole population. And as we've seen, as Zahra has said, also like schools are closing down, they're banning women from attending school or becoming teachers. They're like erasing women's pictures and statues from the streets and stuff. So it's important that we look at these institutions even before there's a conflict, and during when there's conflicts, to make sure that we're not putting people in power who would continuously disregard human rights and women's and children's rights. And I think also when it gets to like the resettlement period, we need to make sure that we're supportive, we're welcoming, that we're encouraging and pushing our governments to make sure that they are they're not making the visa process strenuous for the incoming refugees.
Thank you so much. I think Zahra mentioned the crazy kind of and long visa process that there is as well. Would you like to make any comments on that topic, Zahra?
Yes, quickly to answer your question, it is very important to say that we do not and must not use our Islamophobia to justify what's happening to Muslims in their own land. And in addition to that, seeking asylum and seeking security is part of basic human rights. Everybody deserves to live in peace and safety, and one should not be deprived of that right just because of the man-made borders. Furthermore, understanding, as you asked about visas and seeking asylum, the process is very complicated. So what the younger generation of us can do, and also everybody who has the privilege of identifying as a US citizen and has the right to vote, to reach out to your representatives. You don't know how much, I think at times we are undermining that privilege of how much having to call your representative is a privilege, but also gonna impact the process of what's happening right now. So our main focus should be protecting basic human rights in Afghanistan, the right of refugees right that are coming right now, and also bringing more people and evacuate them off Afghanistan. But in addition to that, opening the outlets that people want to send their fundraising, their reliefs back to Afghanistan, because currently Afghanistan is greatly suffering, and it is not that the government of the Taliban are going to be the ones who are suffering. It's the humans that are living on the land right now who don't have water and food and cannot put anything to the table.
Thank you so much for that response. I think it's clear to me through all three contributions today, just that the crisis is not simple to explain, right? And there's a lot of history behind it. There's a lot of comparison with the global situation in terms of global displacement being at an all-time high right now. For those who are not aware, the UNHCR has claimed that the global displacement is at an all-time high, with now more than 1% humanity being displaced. So rather than having this overwhelm our senses and our institutions, we need to find ways to move forward and to prioritize the people who need to exercise their international rights in terms of right for movement and right for achieving what they are promised, including gender equality and education and these other aspects we've touched upon today. So since we are out of time, I'm going to ask that each of you, if you have any closing comments, you can go ahead for a quick 30 seconds. But other than that, just know that we're very appreciative of you taking your time and energy to let us know what's going on in Afghanistan. And hopefully many of us attending today will still be exploring this topic on our own and acting in our own ways.
Yeah, I would quickly say that, first of all, thank you so much for putting this together. It is very important to be discussed and also understand that people's lives is not a trend. The Afghans will suffer regardless of whether we pay attention or not. So having the international community to pay attention to what's going on right now is very important. Understanding our privileges and understanding how much our existence within the system has impacted the oppression of other individuals across the world is also another important point. With that being said, I sent a couple of links in the chat. The first link is directly the help and assistance that you can provide for me and my family. And the organizations who want to include that in the newsletter, please feel free to do so. And then there was another one with a bunch of other information, including educational information. With that being said, I will send out my information on if you ever want to reach out or if you had any questions, please feel free to do so. Thank you so much.
Thank